Hello. This is kind of weird and out of nowhere, but I would like to talk about this movie, Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I was on my way to the store yesterday and I was going to post something. I knew I had to talk about this movie in some shape or form, but it was on the ride there and then on my way back, I realized that I have a lot to say about this movie. So, this movie is on Hulu. It came out last year and it's been on Hulu for a long time. So if you want to watch it, it's there. I don't think it's going anywhere. So if you are interested in watching it, that's where you can watch it. If you're not interested in listening to me ramble on and on and on about this movie, then now would be the time to just hop off this because this is all it's going to be on my story. And I don't think this is going to be a short, whatever this is. So, what is Portrait of a Lady on Fire, you may be wondering? French film, just a heads up. This film was directed by Celine Sciamma. It stars two women, Adele Haenel as Heloise and Naomi Merlant as Marianne. On a surface level, is just about Marianne, this artist who comes to this island on the northern coast of France in a place called Brittany to paint another woman by the name of Heloise because she's to be married to a man that she's never met, and they're going to send this painting off to the man so he can see what she looks like. And Heloise does not want to be painted. She doesn't want to be objectified in this painting for this man. She doesn't want to marry this man she's never met. So Marianne must paint Heloise in secrecy. So she's hired as like a walking mate. Heloise's sister had just recently committed suicide, so her mother is afraid that Heloise might follow suit. Heloise, of course, is not actually suicidal, but she's just very angry with her situation, with her sister leaving her fate to Heloise. That's just kind of the jumping off point for a bunch of different events to unfold. I think that in itself is a little too much to know about going into this movie. If that doesn't sound enthralling to you, then this movie's not going to be for you. I do think I owe you a fair warning. This movie is very slow. If you don't like this movie in the first like 15, 20 minutes, you're not going to like this movie. It doesn't pick up its pace. But if that does sound like a good time to you, if you do like movies that are more character driven like that, then you will be rewarded with one of the most engrossing experiences that 2019's film year had to offer. I'm going to talk about a few other things if you're still not convinced to watch it yet before I dive into some more specifics, such as like the framing of the film. It was filmed in 8K. In preparation for whatever we're doing here, I watched a lot of interviews and behind the scenes stuff so I could be a little bit more well versed because this is a phenomenal piece of work. The cinematographer's name is Claire Maton. She wanted to film this in 35 millimeter, but when they got out there, they realized that's not going to work. So they decided to go to digital and film it in 8K. And the movie is breathtaking. And that's one of the reasons it's taken me so long to talk about this. I was waiting to get my hands on a Blu-ray copy of it because I was afraid that I would start it on Hulu and then it would freeze and buffer and the atmosphere of the movie would be broken and all this just dumb, weird little shit that I worry about in movies. The opening shot of this movie is this beautiful sunset on this beach. This boat's coming up, Marianne's on the boat. It's this beautiful pink and blue and yellow and aggressively colorful set. Claire Maton brought up that originally Celine Sciamma and her wanted to film this with it being grainy and dark, and to know that this opening scene was supposed to be rainy and cloudy is actually kind of criminal. This film is very much about beauty. The outside settings are all just so gorgeous. Brittany in France is notoriously known for having weather that changes hour on the hour. The entire time they were filming this, it was just beautiful the whole time. They somehow were unlucky and it didn't go according to plan. It was just gorgeous the whole time. And it adds this layer of beauty to a film that's already about art and all these other beautiful subjects. Another reason I feel like I should warn people is because this does not rely on dialogue hardly at all. This movie very much has been kind of joked about how it's mostly just glances between two women. It's just two women staring back and forward at each other, an artist and her muse. The unspoken dialogue that happens between an artist and what they're looking at. And of course, who's looking at the artist but the muse themselves? So Heloise is looking back at Marianne as much as Marianne is looking at her, just from the subtleties of like their eye twitches and the way that they look at each other. So now I'm going to start speaking about a little bit more specific moments in this film. Now, if you don't want to know anything and you do want to watch it, I would stop because I'm just going to go full throttle. But if you're still watching and you're still interested, thank you. Thank you for being here. This film is about love. It is about these two women falling in love. It is one of the most complex and yet subtle depictions of love that I've ever seen. It's so gradual and it's so natural that once it starts kicking in, it's like, oh, this is happening. It's not a surprise. It's just like, oh my goodness, I really want this to happen. And with the ticking time bomb of why Marion is there in the first place to paint this portrait, to send her off to this man, is ever looming in the back of your mind. And that in itself brings up a lot of the different themes of this movie of feminism. Heloise feels very objectified by this, and very rightfully so. Its characters are where the story has its meat and potatoes. When Marianne first arrives, she very much just wants to do her job. She just wants to paint Heloise, collect that check, and bounce. When we first meet Heloise, she's very reserved. Adele Haenel, the actress who portrayed her in interviews, spoke about how she was inspired by older Japanese movies where people would pretend to be who they aren't, and the way they portray them would be very angular without any expression. And it comes through in her performance in a very subtle way. She is very cold. She describes Heloise as an ice cube when we first meet her. Marianne probes her a little bit, and this is what starts to make the ice cube of Heloise melt. The first question she asks her that really starts to make her drop her guard is, do you think your sister did it on purpose? So the way her sister kills herself is by falling off of a cliff. Marianne learns this all from the maid. Her name is Sophie. She actually becomes a very important character later in the film. But Sophie is the one that tells her that she thinks it was suicide because Heloise's sister didn't yell when she fell off the cliff. And so Marianne asks her, do you think it was on purpose? And this was the first instance where Heloise is like, who is this person? Why is she asking me things like this? Marianne also accidentally lets it drop that she draws sometimes. So they're letting their guards down. You have to remember, Marianne isn't supposed to let her know that she is an artist. So when she mentions that she draws, Lisa's like, excuse me? But it's very subtle. It's a lot more subtle than that. It's all in their eyes. When Marianne finishes the painting, she wants to tell Heloise herself that she's been lying to her since she got there. And I had in the back of my mind, I was wondering, why isn't Heloise suspicious? Well, she is. She actually was suspicious of Marianne the whole time, but there's no big explosive moment. She just kind of goes, oh, I'm gonna go swim now. And she comes back, and they talk a little bit more back and forth, and then she has another line where she's like, it's starting to make sense now. And it's just kind of played off like that. And then the next scene, Marianne does show Heloise the original painting that she paints. And Heloise hits her with the, is this how you see me? The dialogue, when it is spoken, is like this 4D layered chess game where they're both kind of going back and forth trying to figure out how to respond to one another, challenging one another, figuring out what your motive is. Why are you asking me this? What should I say? It's always there's always a long pause in between deliveries because all the characters are figuring each other out, but also the actresses themselves had never rehearsed any of this movie together. The first time that they came into contact with one another was on the day of set for each scene. And this adds such a layer of reality to how naturally their relationship progresses into the romantic relationship that it becomes. Because they are very cold and reserved. They don't know each other. How are you going to actually react as an actress to how I'm going to deliver this line? And so it translates so well. I haven't mentioned that this entire movie is a flashback. It opens, Marianne is, I'm going to assume, like 3 or 4 years later. She's got her own art studio. It was her father's art studio that she inherited. One of her students brings out an old painting called A Portrait of a Lady on Fire. And then the flashback starts, and that's where we meet Marianne and Heloise really for the first time. It is important to remember and know that this movie is a flashback. My first time watching it through, there are things that happen towards the end of the flashback that really kind of threw me off, and I didn't fully understand it till my second time watching it. And now that I understand and know what I'm looking at, it's actually just, it's brilliant. I have to bring up Orpheus and Eurydice. It's a story that the three women, Sophie, Heloise, and Marianne, read together one night. Sophie's like, wow, this is very romantic, because the story of Orpheus and Eurydice is Orpheus and Eurydice were going to get married. Eurydice dies. Orpheus goes to Hades. He makes a deal with Hades to have her come back to life, but the way that she comes back to life is Orpheus must walk all the way out of Hades to the living world without turning around to look at Eurydice, who's going to be behind him. But Orpheus does not hear Eurydice the entire time, and so he does end up turning around, and there she is, but she vanishes. And so Sophie says, wow, this is very romantic. Marianne has the argument that no, he is a poet. He didn't make the lover's choice. The lover's choice would have been to keep going, to be unselfish, to bring her back with him, but he is a poet. Literally, Orpheus is a poet, and so he makes the choice to dramatically turn around to see her so he can live with the tragedy. And Heloise makes the argument, what if in this story we don't hear Eurydice say turn around? What if she had said that? And that's where the scene ends. As we get closer to the end of this flashback, this image of Heloise in her wedding dress starts to appear over and over to Marianne, and a first-time view, it's going to be really confusing why this is happening. The last time that the two of them actually see each other, Heloise is in her wedding dress, and Marianne is about to run out the door, and Heloise says, turn around, and it ends just there. It begs for you to talk about, what do you remember most about previous relationships and romantic relationships? It's how it begins and how it ends. So naturally, in this flashback, as she's telling us the story of her greatest romance, as she gets closer to the end, of course, she's going to remember that last image more and more and more. And now that I've seen it twice, it haunts me, honestly. Whenever that first time we see Heloise in that gown, I'm like, oh no, here we go. It's ending. We're getting closer to this terrifying ending, which the last 15 minutes of this movie is absolutely heartbreaking. Nothing, I don't think, can prepare you for it, even when you know what is going to happen. The second time I watched it, I of course knew what was going to happen, but it still just hit me so hard. What's really interesting about the Orpheus and Eurydice story is it actually wasn't in the original script. Celine Sciamma wrote this script over the course of about 4 years, and she knew there was something scratching the back of her head missing from this movie. And when they started filming it, she realized that that's what was missing. So they quickly wrote it in, and to know that it's such a last minute addition and it's such a crucial puzzle piece to how this film works absolutely blows my mind. It's awesome, really, just how well that worked, and I'm glad it's there, because without it, I'm trying to figure out how this movie really would work. It just brings the piece together so much more tightly. I also want to speak about another particular scene that actually translates into our characters. There's an abortion scene in this movie. Sophie mentions to Marianne about the halfway mark that she's pregnant and that she just doesn't want to have the baby. It's not like played up or anything. It's just she doesn't want to have this baby, and it's just that simple. And so Marianne helps her to go through with this abortion. And it's such a crucial scene because Marianne and Heloise are there watching her get the abortion, and Marianne decides to turn around. She's an artist, and she decides to turn around. But Heloise, who is still trying to convince Marion not to objectify her in these paintings. She tells her, no, you need to look at this. So she does. And the way the abortion scene is filmed is actually pretty amazing. They have a real baby right next to Sophie's head, and working with babies, I've never done it, but I can understand that it's hard to get them to perform. And Sophie starts to cry and she turns her head into the baby. She's got her hand right here. The baby wraps like his hands around her finger and with his other hand like wipes her tears away. And I don't know how long they had to sit there to get this shot, but it's amazing. It's kind of funny, it's kind of haunting. It's kind of ironic that you have a live baby next to this woman who's getting an abortion. Maybe I just have a sick sense of humor. And then the next following scene, the women are, it's late, there's a fire going. I need to speak about fire in a second too. The women are together, they can't sleep, and Heloise gets the idea to have Sophie lay down, reenact her abortion. Heloise goes over and she goes, Marianne, you need to create this. You need to solidify this moment for us. It's important because it's, one, very meta, because that was not something that's ever been painted in that time in history. And so it was a nice moment for Celine Sciamma to recapture womanhood and feminism right there in that moment and make it a permanent thing. Also, they made the conscious decision to not let Marianne draw this moment, but to paint it, because at that moment in time, paintings were to always be displayed in museums. Drawings were private, and at that point in the movie, the only painting that was done was the portrait of Heloise. We had seen several instances of Marianne actually drawing just subtle little things all over the place. And so they purposely made her paint this moment so that way it could be a meta representation of this criminal injustice that has happened in history in the art world. This is a lesbian movie, and so there is a lesbian sex scene, but it's not gratuitous like other films such as A Perfect Blue that I'm gonna throw under the bus. The actress for Heloise in interviews has described sex scenes as very violent for actresses, herself in particularly, because she doesn't know what the director's real intention is. And I think in the next like 20, not even 20 years, maybe like 10 years, sex scenes are going to become a very dated thing because they are very unnecessary. In this movie, there is one, but it's literally like this close to them. You don't see anything. They kind of help recapture kind of the immaturity of sex. A lot of movies, this movie, they're like joking. They're just laying there kind of just laughing at each other, and they're about to do drugs for the first time. And it helps create this immature intimacy that I think has been lost from a lot of movies. Every time there's a fire in the movie, I like to think it kind of represents the love that's blossoming between our two characters. Whenever we see a fire on screen, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it's literally a bonfire. And at that bonfire, the music carries on. It's the only time in the movie where music isn't actually coming from something, because the women, they're singing it, and then the scene cuts. They're on the beach, but the music is still going, and it's the first time that the two of them embrace and kiss each other. And it's beautiful. The use of music in this movie is brilliant. There's only 3 songs in this movie. One time, Marianne plays a bit of a song that she knows for Heloise on a harpsichord, and then there's a bonfire scene. The third use of music is at the very end of the movie, and I'll get to that in a second. All this film was filmed in 8K, and this allowed them to do a lot of low light at dark scenes. In a lot of movies, you lose the blush and the softness of skin at nighttime. A lot of time the skin looks blue, but in this movie, it always looks very warm. The scene after they kiss for the first time transitions into one of the most, probably my favorite shot of the movie, where the two women are like very gingerly holding each other in the dark, and you can see like their cheeks just blush, and it looks so pretty. The scene takes its time to just let these two actresses perform and really understand the intimacy of this moment. The third use of music in this movie is the best use of music. in just about any movie I've ever seen. So it's at the end of the movie. Marianne, at this point, the flashback's over. She said, turn around. She's done her thing. It's a distant memory. And she's telling us or someone in her class that, yes, I have seen Heloise again since that moment. Once it was at an art gallery where I was presenting a piece of my work underneath my father's name, bringing back that theme from earlier where these women are living in a man's world. She sees this portrait of Heloise at this gallery. And because we spent so much time figuring out how to paint Heloise and not make her feel objectified, but to really show that she's been understood in this portrait, this really pretty painting of Heloise on the wall, you can clearly tell there was no intimate connection between artist and muse in this moment. And also the camera pans out, someone's head moves out of the way. We have Heloise right here, and then we have her daughter. I believe it was her daughter right here. Like someone's head moves and oh, your heart sinks. She got married, she's had a kid. She approaches the painting, and in their very last moments together, the night before Marianne has to leave, she draws Heloise from just memory at this point. She can just recreate the image over and over. And Heloise has this really striking line where she says, at some point, when you think of me, you're going to think of this woman, bringing back the theme of how she feels objectified by the painting. And then Heloise follows it with, how am I supposed to remember you? Marianne decides to go ahead and give her a drawing of herself. She draws it in a book that Marianne gives Heloise at the very beginning of the movie. And when we're at this art gallery, we see in the portrait of Heloise and her daughter, she's holding that same book, and it's open to page 28 that she did draw the picture of her. So it's even in this static, objectifying painting, it brings back this theme that was established early in the film where the artist is looking at the muse, but the muse is also looking back at the artist. And it's awesome. It's amazing. It's very subtle, and it's such a fantastic payoff. After that scene, we get to the third use of music, where this is the second time that Marianne has seen Heloise after their time on Brittany together. And it's at this place, it's at this theater where the song that Marianne played on the harpsichord is playing for the whole theater. And Marianne slowly looks over and she notices Heloise, and the camera slowly works its way in on Heloise's face, and we can see her subtle reaction. It's a hard last 15 minutes of a movie to get through because you have spent so much time with these characters. The importance of them being lesbians in this movie is that there's no gender control, and the men have a problem with possessing women. And in this movie, the two women are both women and they're equals, so they can absolutely understand each other and the different situations they're in. Heloise being objectified, being wifed off to some man she's never met, and Marianne and only being allowed to be successful because of her father. And then, of course, Sophie, and just wanting an abortion, but she has to do it in secrecy, and it's dangerous. And clearly, I love this movie, and I really would like more people to see it. I don't want it to be buried under the millions of movies that come out and be lost to time. This movie is to be cherished and to be remembered. It's almost a part of what this movie's about, being remembered and being immortalized in art. It's so carefully done, and it's right there. It's been there. Watch this movie, please.